It started with a single knock on the palace door. One knock. That's all it took to shatter the calm that had settled over Kensington Palace. Prince William was in his study, reviewing documents that had little relevance to what would come next. He didn't notice the clock ticking. He didn't notice the faint rustle of papers. All of that, every mundane sound, faded the moment the palace doctors entered the room, faces pale, eyes grave, and a tension that couldn't be masked. "Your Highness," one of the senior doctors said, voice trembling ever so slightly. "We need to speak, urgently." That urgency, the way it hovered in the air, heavy and suffocating, was something no one in that room had ever felt before. William's heart skipped a beat. He had seen many emergencies, both in the public eye and behind closed doors, but nothing prepared him for the weight of the words about to fall from those lips. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Have you ever had the sensation that life as you know it is about to pivot in a way you cannot control? That's exactly what William felt in that moment. His mind raced. What could be so urgent? What could demand such secrecy, such immediate attention? And yet, he already felt the creeping dread, a cold hand on his chest, as if he had glimpsed something dangerous lurking just beyond the edge of the room. Kate, of course. His thoughts immediately turned to her. The woman who had been his anchor, his partner, the person whose smile could light up the darkest of corridors. And yet, here was a moment that threatened to rip everything he thought he knew apart. What had the doctors discovered? What did this mean for Kate's health? For their family? For the future they had so meticulously built? The doctor's words came slowly, deliberately. Every syllable seemed measured, every pause intentional. There was a quiet gravity that filled the room, one that seemed almost tangible. They spoke of tests, of results, of complications. They spoke of realities that William had refused to imagine, had refused to even allow himself to consider. And as the words sank in, his stomach turned, a knot tightening with every second that passed. Imagine hearing news about someone you love, someone you've built your life around. That changes everything in a single heartbeat. Now imagine that news is not just bad. It is alarming, urgent, a potential pivot in life as you know it. That's exactly where William found himself. He had faced public crises before, yes, and there had been moments that tested him in ways most people could not fathom. But this was different. This was personal. This was intimate. This was a confrontation with fear itself, staring him directly in the eyes. The palace, despite its grandeur and its centuries of protocol, felt suddenly claustrophobic. The halls that had echoed with laughter during official events now seemed like corridors leading to uncertainty. Even the portraits of his ancestors on the walls, the regal figures who had endured wars, scandals, and the relentless scrutiny of public life, offered no comfort. Here, in this quiet room, William was acutely aware that history, tradition, and the weight of expectation could not shield him from what was unfolding now. You may be wondering, what could possibly warrant such a reaction from the doctors? What could leave Prince William shaken in a way that no public statement or media frenzy ever could? It is a question that grips the mind, that refuses to release its hold. Because the truth, the reality, was far more complex and far more dire than anyone outside these walls could imagine. And yet, despite the gravity, there was a sliver of hope, a thread of possibility that hung by a precarious edge. Could Kate overcome this? Could the family rally? Could they endure what was coming? These were questions that had no easy answers, and yet they demanded immediate attention. And then there was the public. The world outside these palace walls was oblivious. At least for now. Millions of eyes would soon be turned toward every detail, every hint, every word. The media would dissect the situation, pundits would speculate endlessly, and social media would erupt into a storm of opinion and conjecture. But inside the palace, in the room where William now stood, there was only the immediate reality. An urgent medical update, a family's private fear, and a man grappling with the possibility that his life and the life of the woman he loves could change forever in the blink of an eye. Let's pause for a moment and consider this. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone you care about is suddenly threatened, and all your plans, all your sense of security, crumble? That is exactly what William was experiencing. magnified 1,000-fold by the intense public scrutiny that comes with being a member of the royal family. Every decision he made, every reaction, would be under scrutiny, and yet, in that room, there was no audience, only the unrelenting truth that demanded action. The doctors presented the details cautiously. The language was precise, clinical, but the implications were anything but. Each term, each medical phrase carried weight far beyond its dictionary definition. Complications, progression, prognosis. These words, normally detached and professional, now felt like a hammer to William's chest. And as he processed the information, he couldn't help but think of Kate, her strength, her resilience, and the uncertainty that now threatened to overshadow both. It's worth noting that the palace has always been a place of meticulous planning, of image management, of careful communication. But some moments defy preparation. This was one of them. There was no press release that could preempt the emotional reality, no spin that could soften the blow. In that moment, William faced the raw truth, unfiltered and unyielding. And it was terrifying. In times like this, decisions must be made swiftly. But urgency does not erase fear. William's mind raced through possibilities, consultations, treatments, potential outcomes. Each scenario was weighed, reconsidered, doubted, and reconsidered again. The stakes were incomprehensibly high, and the consequences of missteps could reverberate far beyond the palace walls. Every second counted, yet every second was a reminder of the fragility of life, even for those who live in grandeur and privilege. And as he absorbed the information, one thought dominated his mind. How do you protect someone you love when the very thing they fear is now unavoidable? How do you navigate a reality that seems to twist further from hope with every passing moment? These questions, raw and unrelenting, provided no comfort, no guidance. There was only the necessity to act, to confront the situation with clarity and courage, even when every instinct screamed otherwise. But what made this moment truly unprecedented was the element of secrecy. This was not a public health crisis or a matter for official statement. This was intimate, private, confined to the walls of the palace. The world would soon know, of course, but for now, every heartbeat, every whispered conversation, carried a weight that the public could not comprehend. The responsibility on William's shoulders was immense, compounded by the knowledge that the decisions made in these next moments could define the trajectory of his family's future. And yet, amidst the fear, a flicker of determination emerged. William was not a man to cower in the face of adversity. He understood, perhaps more than anyone, the intersection of duty, love, and resilience. He knew that what lay ahead would test him in ways he had never experienced. But he also knew that inaction was not an option. There was a path forward, however narrow, however fraught with risk, and he had to find it. So here we are, at the precipice. Prince William, faced with an urgent medical update that threatens not just the health of his beloved Kate, but the very stability of their lives, must navigate a labyrinth of fear, hope, and unrelenting scrutiny. Every word spoken, every choice made, could have lasting consequences. And the question that hangs over everything, unspoken but deeply felt, is this: what will happen next? How will Kate respond? How will the palace, and indeed the world, react when the full reality comes to light? It all began with a phone call. One of those calls that instantly sets your heart racing, the kind you can't ignore no matter how many other responsibilities are piled on your desk. Prince William was sitting in his study, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside him, when his private secretary's voice cut through the quiet. "Your Highness, you need to see the doctors immediately. It's urgent. Urgent." The word alone carries weight, but in the context of the palace, it is almost a whisper of doom. William's chest tightened. Urgent rarely meant routine. Urgent meant a shift in reality, an event that would ripple across every aspect of life. He didn't need to ask what it was about. Deep down, he already feared the answer: Kate. The walk to the medical quarters felt like an eternity. Every step echoed against the polished floors, every sound amplified in a way that made his own heartbeat thunder in his ears. There was a coldness in the air, a sterility that seemed more oppressive than usual. The palace had seen countless crises, political, personal, and public, but none quite like this. Not like this, where the very person who anchored his life was suddenly at risk. When the doctors finally appeared, their faces were somber, their eyes avoiding direct contact. There was a tension in their posture, a subtle trembling that betrayed the gravity of their message. William felt the air shift around him, as if the room itself recognized the storm brewing. "Your Highness," said the lead physician, his voice steady but quiet, "we've received the latest test results, and they are concerning." Concerning. That single word, clinical and measured, landed like a hammer. William braced himself, though he knew no amount of preparation could soften the blow. He had witnessed emergencies before, seen the ripple effects of medical crises within his family. But hearing it in this controlled, hushed environment made it feel immediate, inescapable, and terrifyingly real. "Concerning how?" he asked, voice taut, controlled. Every ounce of composure he could muster was already stretched thin. The doctor paused, choosing words as one might choose tools for delicate surgery. "Kate's condition has progressed. The latest scans indicate complications that require immediate attention. We believe prompt action is necessary to manage the situation effectively." William's mind raced. Complications. Immediate attention. Words that might as well have been detonators in his brain. He knew the media would never capture the gravity of these private moments, never understand the full emotional weight. The public might speculate, might analyze appearances and statements, but they couldn't feel the immediate, palpable fear that gripped him. They couldn't feel the uncertainty that made every breath feel slightly heavier. He demanded specifics, and the doctors, trained for discretion, provided only enough to clarify the urgency without divulging sensitive details. Tests, progression, prognosis. Each word felt like it was pulling him further into a nightmare he could not escape. William thought of Kate, her grace, her resilience, her ability to smile even in the harshest of public scrutiny, and his chest tightened with a mixture of fear and determination. She was strong, yes, but this was different. As he processed the information, he couldn't help but replay recent memories in his mind. Public events where Kate seemed radiant, composed, seemingly unaffected by whatever she might have been enduring behind closed doors. The dinners, the interviews, the charitable appearances, all meticulously curated, all hiding the reality of what she was facing. How had he missed it? How had no one seen the signs? And yet, there it was, laid bare by the cold, clinical words of the doctors. The doctors proposed a series of interventions, a plan that required precision, discretion, and above all, immediacy. William listened, absorbing the logistics, the risks, the potential outcomes. Every scenario presented another layer of worry, another pathway through which something could go wrong. His mind flicked between hope and fear, analyzing probabilities, imagining the consequences of every decision. Then there was the question of communication. When, if at all, would this information reach the public? How could he manage the balance between privacy and responsibility? The media's insatiable appetite for royal news was legendary, and yet, this was not just any headline. This was personal. This was life and health intertwined with legacy, public image, and family loyalty. Every move would be scrutinized, every word dissected, every pause interpreted as weakness, or worse, guilt. William excused himself for a moment, stepping into the corridor, his mind a storm of strategy and emotion. He thought of George, Charlotte, and Louis, the children who had no concept of the gravity of adult problems, but whose lives would inevitably be affected. How could he shield them from fear while also preparing for every eventuality? How could he protect his family while maintaining the dignity and protocol expected of a future king? Returning to the medical team, he asked the hardest questions. What were the options? What were the probabilities of success? Could this be managed without disrupting public perception or causing unnecessary panic? Each answer revealed more complexity, more nuance, more stakes than he had anticipated. The palace, with all its history, wealth, and influence, suddenly felt fragile. And then came the hardest revelation of all. Despite all their planning, all their protocols, there was an element beyond their control. Uncertainty. Medical science, as advanced as it had become, had limits. There were variables, risks, unknowns that could shift outcomes in ways that no one could predict. For a man who had spent his life navigating control, responsibility, and image, this lack of certainty was both humbling and terrifying. The doctors left the room with careful instructions, leaving William alone with his thoughts, the weight of urgency pressing down like a physical force. He paced, considered, reflected. Every decision now mattered more than ever. Every moment was critical, and yet, the public remained blissfully unaware, expecting normalcy while the private chambers of the palace were gripped by fear and uncertainty. As night fell over London, the lights of the city twinkled, indifferent to the turmoil within Kensington Palace. William stared out the window, contemplating the path forward, realizing that the coming hours would demand every ounce of courage, clarity, and resilience he could muster. And yet, even in the darkest moments, there was a spark of determination. He would face this, protect his family, and navigate the storm. But the question that lingered, unrelenting, was this: what would come next? What unforeseen development would shift the course of events even further, and how would he respond when that moment arrived? Because in the quiet of the palace, amid the protocols and the legacy, one truth remained undeniable. Some events cannot be controlled, some news cannot be softened, and some moments, no matter how carefully managed, will change everything. Behind the polished appearances, the carefully curated public smiles, and the media-friendly engagements, Kate Middleton had been carrying a burden few could truly understand. To the world, she remained poised, elegant, and seemingly untouchable, a symbol of grace under pressure. But beneath the surface, hidden from cameras and public scrutiny, there was a struggle that had been quietly intensifying. It started subtly. A missed engagement here, a quiet withdrawal there. At first, they seemed like normal moments in the hectic life of royalty. A tired evening after a long day of charity work, a delayed appearance due to scheduling conflicts. But over time, these incidents formed a pattern. Friends noticed. Palace aides whispered. Even William began to sense that something was different, not overtly alarming, but undeniably present. A shift in energy, a shadow in her usually radiant eyes. Kate had always been meticulous in her health routines. Exercise, diet, rest, the careful balance required of someone constantly in the public eye. But even the most disciplined routines cannot always prevent life from introducing complications. The first signs were minor: fleeting fatigue, occasional pain, a subtle pallor that even makeup couldn't completely mask. To anyone else, they might have seemed insignificant, easily overlooked. But to someone attuned to every detail of her health and demeanor, these were warning signs. Imagine living a life where every step, every word, every gesture is scrutinized, where your public persona must remain flawless even as your body silently signals distress. That was Kate's reality. She could not simply pause and address these issues in private without drawing speculation, without prompting questions that would ripple across the media landscape. So she carried on, masking discomfort with practiced smiles, concealing pain with carefully chosen words and poised appearances. Even William, as close to her as any partner could be, had only glimpses of the full picture. He noticed small things: the way she occasionally winced when standing for long periods, the brief moments where she would close her eyes as if gathering strength, the rare occasions she would speak in a softer, more subdued tone. But nothing screamed alarm. The palace doctors, meanwhile, were monitoring quietly, conducting tests and evaluations behind the scenes, maintaining the delicate balance between privacy and urgent medical care. Then came the latest test results, the ones that would shake William to his core. These were not routine checkups, not standard monitoring. These were results that indicated a progression, a complication that demanded immediate attention. Kate had been dealing with this quietly, managing symptoms as best she could, but the latest developments required a reassessment of her condition and an urgent recalibration of the palace's medical strategy. William's mind raced as he considered what this meant. Kate's hidden struggle, long managed with discretion, was now at a tipping point. The careful equilibrium she had maintained between public duty, family responsibilities, and private health was beginning to fracture. He felt a pang of guilt, a silent question. Had he missed something? Could he have done more to notice, to act sooner? At the same time, there was admiration. Kate's resilience, her ability to continue performing her public role despite mounting personal challenges, was extraordinary. She had endured pressures that would have crushed most people, maintaining composure even as her body sent signals of distress. William knew the stakes, the delicate balance of privacy and responsibility, and he understood that revealing the full extent of her struggle too soon could create chaos, both within the palace and in the public sphere. The doctors outlined a plan. Careful, precise, and urgent interventions would be necessary. Treatments needed to be administered promptly, schedules adjusted, and health monitored with extreme vigilance. Every detail mattered. The palace staff prepared discreetly, adjusting calendars, coordinating aids, and ensuring that the family's public image remained intact while the private, critical measures unfolded behind closed doors. And yet, there was an element beyond their control: the unpredictability of disease, the human body's capacity to respond, or not respond, to intervention. Kate's condition, while manageable, carried inherent risks. Decisions had to be made swiftly, weighing medical expertise against potential complications, balancing urgency with prudence. It was a delicate dance, one that left William in constant contemplation, aware that every choice carried far-reaching consequences. The emotional toll on William was immediate and profound. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him, the intensity of fear mingling with the determination to protect Kate at all costs. He knew that he could not falter, that any hesitation could have serious ramifications. But even as he grappled with strategy, scheduling, and consultation, the human element, the profound love, worry, and connection, remained at the forefront. And then came the next challenge: secrecy. The world knew nothing, yet speculation would eventually arise. Every public appearance, every social interaction, every news headline had the potential to uncover hints of what was happening behind the palace walls. William had to navigate this treacherous landscape, protecting Kate's privacy while preparing for eventual transparency. How could he safeguard her dignity, maintain public trust, and respond effectively to any media scrutiny, all while managing the immediate medical crisis? At night, when the palace was quiet and the corridors dimly lit, William found moments to reflect. He thought of Kate not just as the public figure, but as the woman he loved, the mother of his children, the partner who had shared his joys and fears. He considered her courage, her quiet fortitude, and the moments of vulnerability she allowed only in private. Those reflections were both comforting and heartbreaking, a reminder of how intertwined their lives were and how much was at stake. Insiders reported small moments that revealed the strain Kate had been under. Brief conversations where she admitted fatigue, quiet sighs in private quarters, and subtle gestures that indicated she was managing more than anyone realized. These glimpses, though minor to an outsider, painted a picture of a woman quietly grappling with a significant health challenge, balancing duty and personal well-being with remarkable composure. William's thoughts shifted to the children: George, Charlotte, and Louis. How much should they know? How could he shield them from fear while preparing for any potential medical developments? Parenting under such scrutiny, while managing a crisis that could impact not just family dynamics but public perception, was a balancing act of unprecedented complexity. Every decision about communication, transparency, and protection required careful consideration. The medical team worked tirelessly, adjusting protocols and schedules, monitoring vital signs, and preparing for possible interventions. Every step had to be precise, every action carefully coordinated. And yet, despite the meticulous planning, there was always the unknown: a sudden change in symptoms, an unexpected reaction, a variable that could alter the trajectory of treatment. This uncertainty hung over William like a shadow, a reminder that even the best-laid plans could encounter unforeseen obstacles. As the day progressed, William remained vigilant, shifting between strategic planning and moments of private reflection. The palace, while outwardly serene, was a hub of quiet activity. Aides moved discreetly, medical staff coordinated behind closed doors, and William navigated the delicate balance of public appearances and private urgency. The weight of responsibility, compounded by personal emotion and public expectation, was immense. And yet, even amidst the tension, there was hope. Kate had faced challenges before, demonstrating resilience and strength that inspired those around her. William clung to that hope, using it as a guide, a beacon in the uncertainty. Every action, every decision, was informed by the belief that with careful management, determination, and support, they could navigate this crisis successfully. But there was one element that even William could not control: the unpredictable nature of developments yet to come. A single twist, an unexpected complication, could change everything. And as he prepared for the coming hours, he understood that every moment mattered. The world outside Kensington Palace remained oblivious, but inside, every heartbeat, every decision, every conversation carried weight that could define the next chapter of their lives. Because in the life of a royal, privacy is rare, control is limited, and the stakes are monumental. William had to navigate these treacherous waters with precision, courage, and an unwavering focus on protecting Kate. And yet, the question lingered, persistent and unrelenting. What would the next revelation bring? What unseen development would push them further into uncertainty? The atmosphere in the palace had changed. It was subtle at first. A stiffness in the air, a hush in the halls, whispers among the aides, but it became undeniable once the medical team arrived. Prince William, who had spent the day alternating between strategy and silent contemplation, now faced the full weight of the situation. The palace doctors had called him in urgently, requesting a private briefing, and the words that awaited him would mark a turning point. From the moment he entered the room, William sensed that this was not an ordinary update. The doctors, usually composed and methodical, were visibly tense. Their expressions were controlled, but their eyes betrayed a gravity that could not be ignored. This was serious, more serious than anything he had anticipated, more urgent than even his deepest fears had imagined. "Your Highness," began the senior physician, voice steady but low, "we have received the latest results, and we need to discuss them immediately. There are developments in Kate's condition that require prompt action." Prompt action. The phrase struck William like a physical blow. Every fiber of his being braced against the weight of those words. In the sterile light of the consultation room, with monitors quietly ticking and the hum of medical equipment as a backdrop, the reality of the moment became stark. This was not about planning for the future. This was about responding now. The doctor continued, detailing the progression of Kate's condition with clinical precision. Every word was carefully chosen, each phrase designed to convey urgency without inducing panic. But to William, the meaning was clear. Something had shifted, and the window for delay had closed. Complications that had been minor or manageable before were now escalating. Intervention was not merely recommended, it was imperative. Imagine hearing this about someone you love, someone whose very presence has shaped your life. Imagine the mental calculus that follows. What choices to make, which experts to consult, how to balance immediate action with long-term outcomes. William's mind raced, processing the technical details while simultaneously grappling with the human element, the fear, the love, the urgency. The doctors laid out the options with clarity, yet each choice carried risk. They spoke of treatments that could stabilize her condition, of monitoring strategies, of interventions that required precision timing. And while the science was thorough, the human variables, the reactions of Kate's body, the emotional toll on her and her family, added layers of complexity that no protocol could fully address. William asked the questions that anyone in his position would. What are the probabilities? What are the risks? Could this be managed privately, without public alarm? How fast do we need to act? The doctors answered with professional candor, careful to provide clarity without unnecessary alarm. But with each response, William felt the enormity of the situation settle further onto his shoulders. He thought of Kate's past strength, her ability to navigate public scrutiny with grace and composure. He thought of the children, oblivious to the storm raging just beyond their awareness. He considered the palace itself, a symbol of continuity, protocol, and history, and realized that no amount of tradition could shield them from the realities of health crises. Every decision he made now mattered not just for Kate, but for the family, the legacy, and the delicate balance of public perception. As the briefing continued, William began to grasp the full scope. This was not just a medical concern. It was a crisis of timing, communication, and strategy. Any misstep could lead to unnecessary complications or public speculation. But waiting was not an option. The doctors emphasized that prompt intervention could make the difference between manageable outcomes and a scenario that would escalate beyond control. The conversation turned toward logistics, coordinating care, arranging specialized treatment, and preparing for any potential emergencies required precision. The palace staff had to be mobilized discreetly, schedules adjusted, and contingency plans prepared. William absorbed every detail, weighing options, visualizing scenarios, and imagining potential consequences. He was acutely aware that each action taken in these private moments would echo beyond the walls of the palace in ways few could anticipate. Beyond logistics, there was the emotional landscape. William felt a tension between the desire to maintain composure and the natural human instinct to panic. He understood the importance of remaining steady, not only for Kate, but for the entire household and staff. Fear, while natural, could not guide his actions. Clarity, decisiveness, and a focus on the immediate needs were imperative. He left the briefing room momentarily, walking the quiet corridors, reflecting on the enormity of the situation. The palace, often a place of grandeur and ceremonial order, now felt charged with an intensity that was almost palpable. Staff moved discreetly, aware of the gravity without needing details. Every door, every hallway seemed to hold the weight of impending decisions. Returning to the consultation, William and the doctors discussed potential next steps. Each plan had its own set of implications: medical, emotional, and strategic. The senior physician reminded him that while the science was clear, the human element, stress, unpredictability, and response, would be equally critical. William understood that these moments required a balance of clinical precision and emotional intelligence, both applied simultaneously under pressure. The doctors emphasized the need for discretion. The world outside the palace walls remained unaware, and it was essential to control information until a clear path forward was determined. Public knowledge could create speculation, unnecessary alarm, and complicate the management of the situation. The delicate choreography of maintaining privacy while preparing for transparency became another layer of responsibility on William's shoulders. And yet, even as he absorbed the details, a subtle thought lingered. Despite all precautions, there were elements beyond control. The unpredictability of medical outcomes, the potential for unforeseen complications, and the pressures of public scrutiny meant that even the most carefully constructed plans could be disrupted. William felt the tension of that uncertainty, recognizing it as an inescapable reality. He thought of Kate, not as a figure under public scrutiny, but as the woman he loved. The private Kate, the partner, the mother, the individual who had shared joys, fears, and dreams with him. He reflected on her resilience and grace, understanding that while medical plans could guide treatment, the human spirit would play a role no protocol could anticipate. As the briefing concluded, William understood the path ahead would require focus, courage, and rapid action. The palace doctors had delivered the urgent update, clearly articulating the stakes, the options, and the immediate need for intervention. But the weight of responsibility now rested squarely on his shoulders. Decisions had to be made, coordination executed, and the balance of privacy and public awareness carefully maintained. The room emptied, leaving William alone with the magnitude of what he had just heard. Silence settled, yet the urgency lingered, a persistent pulse echoing in his mind. The calm he had maintained moments before now felt fragile, overshadowed by the complexity of what lay ahead. Every decision, every action, every interaction in the coming hours would matter more than any he had faced before. And in that quiet, William realized a stark truth. The palace, for all its centuries of history and tradition, was facing a moment that could redefine its present and future. The urgency of the doctor's update had set events in motion, and nothing would be the same again. The next steps would require precision, courage, and an unwavering commitment to Kate's well-being. The doors to the consultation room closed with a soft, almost imperceptible click, leaving Prince William alone with the gravity of the news he had just received. In that silence, the weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a physical force. He leaned against the polished wooden desk, staring at the papers scattered before him, not the documents themselves, but the symbolic reminder of the life he now had to navigate. Every detail mattered. Every decision could tip the balance between hope and crisis. William's mind raced. He had faced intense pressure before, public scrutiny, media storms, even political tension. But nothing compared to the intimate urgency of a threat to Kate's health. Here, there was no protocol, no centuries-old precedent, no guidelines on how to respond emotionally while acting decisively. This was personal. This was private. This was a moment where love, duty, and fear collided. He ran his hands through his hair, a rare gesture of visible anxiety. Normally composed and methodical, William now found himself grappling with raw emotion. There was guilt. Had he missed the subtle signs? There was fear. What if interventions failed? And there was determination. He would act. He must act. And he would navigate the storm no matter the cost. In the quiet of the palace, he replayed the doctor's words over and over. Complications. Urgent intervention. Prompt action required. Each phrase etched itself into his consciousness, leaving no room for distraction, no space for denial. This was real. This was immediate. And this was a test unlike any other he had faced. William knew he had to strategize. He began mentally mapping the next steps, consulting with specialists, coordinating care, arranging for the palace staff to manage both private and public affairs. Each action required precision. Mistakes were not an option. Every decision had consequences, medical, emotional, and reputational. The stakes were higher than ever, and time was slipping through his fingers with relentless speed. But amid the calculated logistics, there was the human element, the emotional truth he could not ignore. Kate was not merely a patient or a figure under his responsibility. She was his partner, the mother of his children, the woman whose presence had defined so many years of his life. He could not detach himself from the fear, the concern, the vulnerability that now gripped him. The private moments, the ones away from public scrutiny, were filled with reflection, silent worry, and an almost tangible anxiety that pulsed with every heartbeat. He considered the children, George, Charlotte, and Louis. How much should they be shielded from the truth? How could he maintain a semblance of normalcy while preparing for medical interventions that could affect their mother's health? The balance of protection and honesty weighed heavily on him. He understood the necessity of shielding them from fear, yet he also knew that preparation, guidance, and support would be essential if circumstances worsened. In this private reflection, William allowed himself a rare moment of vulnerability. He paced the quiet corridors, imagining the potential outcomes, considering contingencies, and mentally rehearsing conversations he might have with family, aides, and medical personnel. Every scenario was a complex equation, balancing risk, timing, and emotional response. And then there was the element of secrecy. The world outside remained unaware of the urgency inside the palace. Public appearances, scheduled events, media narratives, all had to be managed carefully. William's mind was a constant calculation of how to maintain appearances while prioritizing Kate's well-being. How could he act decisively without inviting speculation? How could he protect his family while navigating the relentless scrutiny that accompanied every public gesture? He thought of Kate's resilience. She had always maintained grace under pressure, handled public expectations with poise, and confronted personal challenges with quiet strength. Yet, now the situation demanded more than composure. It demanded coordinated action, swift decisions, and the courage to face an uncertain future head-on. William recognized that while love and admiration were powerful, they alone could not solve the crisis at hand. Strategic intervention, medical oversight, and careful planning were essential. The palace staff, sensing the tension, moved with discreet efficiency. Aides whispered quietly in hallways, adjusting schedules and preparing private quarters, while medical personnel coordinated in the background. William observed it all, acutely aware that every small adjustment was part of a larger effort to manage both the crisis and the optics of the situation. Yet, even with meticulous planning, William could not escape the unpredictability of human health. Complications could arise without warning, responses could be unexpected, and every plan carried inherent uncertainty. The awareness of this unpredictability only heightened his vigilance, sharpening his focus and intensifying the emotional weight of each passing moment. He retreated to a private sitting room, closing the doors and allowing himself to breathe. He reflected on the years he had spent alongside Kate, the experiences they had shared, the family they had built. Love, duty, fear, and hope intertwined in a way that made action both necessary and emotionally charged. He felt the enormity of responsibility, both as a husband and as a future king, and recognized that the coming hours would test every ounce of his resolve. In his solitude, William contemplated the balance between immediate medical intervention and emotional support. How could he remain a pillar of strength while processing his own fear? How could he offer reassurance and decisiveness simultaneously? These were questions without easy answers, yet they demanded clarity, focus, and courage. As he prepared to re-engage with the doctors, to coordinate interventions, and to manage the complex web of responsibilities, one truth became undeniable. The next steps would not merely influence Kate's health, they would define the emotional and strategic trajectory of the entire family. Every choice mattered. Every action was consequential. And in that quiet, introspective moment, William understood that his personal reaction, his ability to remain calm under pressure, and his decisiveness would be pivotal in navigating the storm. The hours ahead would be filled with difficult conversations, urgent decisions, and the constant tension of balancing privacy with public expectation. William's private reaction, fear tempered by resolve, anxiety transformed into strategic clarity, was now the linchpin upon which the family's stability rested. The palace has always been a fortress of tradition, secrecy, and careful management. Yet even within its hallowed halls, whispers travel quickly, and secrets, no matter how closely guarded, have a way of surfacing. For Prince William, the latest medical crisis involving Kate Middleton was not just a private struggle. It was now a nexus of rumors, speculation, and insider revelations that threatened to complicate every decision he faced. It started with a quiet conversation in the inner corridors, barely audible, yet enough to raise concern. An aide, someone who had been with the family for years, mentioned noticing small but unusual patterns in Kate's routine: a late night canceled, a subtle change in her demeanor, a private meeting with medical staff that seemed unusually frequent. These details, seemingly minor, began to form a mosaic of information that suggested the situation was far more serious than what had been publicly acknowledged. Insiders with even closer access confirmed suspicions. Kate had been enduring more than the public realized. Behind the carefully staged appearances, behind the smiling waves and poised interviews, there were private struggles. She had managed fatigue, subtle pain, and stress with grace, but the progression of her condition meant that the palace could no longer operate under the pretense of routine. Action was required, and urgency was paramount. William absorbed these revelations with a mixture of shock, concern, and determination. Every insider report added context, clarifying pieces of the puzzle he had only partially seen. Yet it also intensified the pressure. The more he learned, the clearer it became that careful planning, discretion, and swift execution were critical. Any misstep, any public exposure, could escalate what was already a delicate situation. Some of the most shocking insights came from those closest to the family. Longtime staff members, trusted confidants, and palace insiders shared observations that revealed both Kate's resilience and the hidden complexity of the medical challenges she faced. She had quietly altered her routines, avoided certain engagements, and devoted private time to rest and recovery, all while maintaining the public image of perfect composure. These revelations painted a picture of a woman managing a delicate balance between private struggle and public expectation. Yet the progression of her condition had now forced the situation into the open, even if only behind closed doors. The implications of these insider revelations were profound. Not only did they highlight the severity of Kate's condition, but they also exposed the delicate interplay between the palace's private management and public perception. William realized that every move he made would be scrutinized, every decision would be interpreted, and any leak could trigger a media storm. The palace's centuries-long tradition of discretion was suddenly under strain, tested by the immediacy of the crisis and the inevitability of eventual public awareness. Even more unsettling were reports of internal disagreements. Some aides questioned the timing of interventions, others debated the extent of disclosure necessary, and a few suggested that the situation required extraordinary measures that deviated from standard protocol. These internal conflicts, while subtle, added another layer of complexity to an already high-stakes scenario. William now had to navigate not only the medical urgency, but also the human dynamics of loyalty, trust, and differing opinions within the palace itself. To understand the gravity, imagine a family operating under a microscope, where every decision is amplified, every choice dissected, and every action carries consequences beyond the immediate circle. William had to weigh medical necessity against protocol, personal judgment against insider advice, and privacy against potential exposure. The insider revelations were invaluable, yet they also intensified the stakes, adding pressure, urgency, and moral complexity to every step. As William considered the mosaic of insider reports, he began to identify patterns. There were consistencies in observations that confirmed the seriousness of Kate's condition. There were also discrepancies that required careful analysis, differences in recollection, variations in interpretation, and conflicting advice that demanded discernment. Each insight needed to be weighed carefully, as even minor misjudgments could have significant consequences. Meanwhile, the palace itself became a stage for subtle maneuvering. Staff members coordinated quietly, balancing the need for discretion with the practicalities of urgent care. The inner circle adjusted schedules, prepared private quarters, and ensured that medical resources were aligned with anticipated interventions. William oversaw these efforts, using the insider revelations as guidance while maintaining strategic oversight. There was also a psychological dimension to consider. Insider revelations painted Kate as strong and resilient, yet human. Understanding her coping mechanisms, her moments of vulnerability, and her private fears became critical for managing not only her care, but the family's emotional stability. William recognized that empathy, patience, and attentiveness were just as important as medical decisions. He needed to anticipate her needs, support her decisions, and remain a source of strength without overshadowing her agency. But the most startling insider revelation was one that William could never have anticipated. While everyone focused on medical urgency, there were whispers of external pressures. Forces outside the palace, subtle influences from media speculation, and the shadow of public expectation that threatened to complicate the private management of the crisis. William realized that this situation was not contained within the palace walls. It was already intertwined with global attention, social scrutiny, and the inexorable curiosity of the public. Every decision now had dual implications, immediate and strategic. The tension became almost unbearable. William found himself pacing through quiet corridors, alternating between moments of focused planning and private reflection. He considered the medical advice, weighed insider reports, and projected potential outcomes, both expected and unforeseen. Every scenario demanded foresight, patience, and a degree of courage that tested even his most disciplined instincts. In the midst of this, he received a message from one of the senior aides. A discreet note indicating that there were additional revelations coming from another trusted insider. These insights promised to shed further light on the intricacies of Kate's condition, the subtle signs she had been managing, and the strategic considerations necessary for effective intervention. William knew that he would need to process these revelations carefully, integrating them into a coherent plan while maintaining both composure and discretion. It was clear. The insider revelations were not just background information. They were central to navigating the unfolding crisis. Every observation, every whisper, every carefully reported detail became a crucial piece of the puzzle. William had to synthesize these insights into actionable decisions, balancing urgency, care, and discretion in a situation where stakes could not be higher. And just when he thought he had a handle on the emerging picture, a new revelation arrived. One so unexpected, so potentially disruptive, that it threatened to upend the delicate balance he had been working to maintain. By the time the evening sun had faded behind the skyline of London, the tension inside Kensington Palace had reached a nearly unbearable intensity. The urgency of Kate's medical condition was no longer abstract, no longer something to be processed in hypothetical terms. Every passing hour brought a tangible escalation. Symptoms shifting, indicators fluctuating, and the delicate balance of her health demanding constant monitoring. Prince William remained at the epicenter of the storm. Even in the privacy of the palace, the weight of responsibility was crushing. His mind oscillated between strategy and fear, between protocol and instinct. He had to ensure that medical teams were fully briefed, that interventions were coordinated, and that every contingency was planned for, all while keeping composure in front of aides, staff, and anyone who might inadvertently sense the gravity of the situation. The senior palace doctors convened another meeting. Their expressions, while professional, betrayed the escalation of concern. William listened intently as they outlined subtle but significant changes in Kate's condition. Vital signs that had seemed stable earlier were now presenting patterns that demanded attention. Complications, while still manageable, were becoming more pronounced. Timing had become critical. Every hour delayed could increase risk. Imagine the psychological weight of this, knowing that someone you love, someone central to your life, is facing an evolving medical crisis, where interventions are precise but the margin for error is slim. William understood the stakes not just as a husband, but as a leader responsible for coordinating resources, staff, and public messaging. The human and strategic dimensions were intertwined, creating a pressure cooker of emotion and responsibility. The doctors recommended adjustments to her care plan. These changes were not minor. They required immediate logistical coordination, reassignment of staff, and precise scheduling to ensure that Kate received optimal treatment. William oversaw each recommendation, mentally cross-referencing every potential consequence, considering both the medical and emotional impact. Amid this heightened urgency, William also faced the challenge of anticipation. The progression of Kate's condition could unfold in unpredictable ways, and he needed to prepare for multiple scenarios simultaneously. Would the intervention stabilize her? Could additional complications arise? How would the children be affected emotionally? These questions offered no comfort, only the stark realization that preparedness was his only tool against uncertainty. Meanwhile, the palace staff was in constant motion, executing orders with quiet efficiency. Private quarters were adjusted, aides coordinated discreetly, and medical personnel worked tirelessly to ensure that every variable was monitored. Even the smallest deviation from the plan could have cascading consequences, and William's awareness of these stakes kept him hyper-focused, mentally calculating every potential ripple effect. In private moments, William reflected on Kate, not merely as a public figure, but as the woman he loved. He thought about her courage, her resilience, and the quiet way she had managed to maintain composure despite her private struggle. Those reflections strengthened his resolve, reminding him that emotional support, understanding, and empathy were just as critical as medical intervention. Yet even as he tried to maintain composure, the unpredictability of human biology loomed large. Complications could arise suddenly, symptoms could escalate without warning, and the plan, as meticulously as it had been crafted, could encounter unforeseen challenges. William's understanding of this unpredictability heightened his vigilance, sharpening every decision and intensifying the emotional stakes. And then came the first real shock. A subtle change in one of Kate's test results, something the doctors described as unexpected but notable, signaled that her condition was shifting faster than anticipated. This revelation prompted immediate reassessment. New specialists were consulted, alternative interventions considered, and contingency plans accelerated. The situation had moved from urgent to critical, a step that demanded both swift action and careful calculation. William's heart raced as he processed this development. He had braced himself for difficulty, but the acceleration of the situation intensified the pressure in ways he had not anticipated. Every decision now carried amplified consequences, not only for Kate's health, but for the stability of the family and the delicate management of the palace's public image. The senior physician emphasized the urgency. Immediate adjustments could make the difference between stabilization and deterioration. William, absorbing the gravity, understood that hesitation was not an option. He coordinated with aides, verified logistical details, and ensured that the palace staff remained aligned with the medical directives. Every element had to function seamlessly. Even in this moment of technical focus, the human dimension could not be ignored. William considered how Kate might feel: fear, anxiety, exhaustion. He contemplated how to provide reassurance, maintain composure, and offer support, even as he navigated the complex logistics behind the scenes. His role required a delicate balance: decisiveness without coldness, action without panic, empathy without distraction. The palace, normally a symbol of tradition and stability, now pulsed with urgency. Hallways once filled with routine activity were now arenas of quiet coordination. Staff moved with purpose, medical equipment hummed in readiness, and William's presence ensured that focus remained sharp. Yet, for all the preparation, there was still the element of unpredictability. The unknown variable that could emerge at any moment, altering the course of events. As night deepened, William found a brief moment alone, staring out over the quiet city. London's lights shimmered indifferently, unaware of the crisis unfolding in one of its most iconic residences. In that moment, he reflected on the delicate interplay between public life, private responsibility, and human vulnerability. He recognized that the coming hours would test his resolve, judgment, and emotional endurance like never before. Then, as if to underline the fragile balance of the moment, the phone rang. Another update from the medical team. Another shift in Kate's condition. The complexity of the situation had escalated, and the stakes were higher than ever. William knew that the decisions he would make in the next minutes and hours could determine the trajectory of the crisis, and that the next revelation could change everything. The night was quiet, deceptively so. Kensington Palace, with all its grandeur and centuries of history, seemed almost still, yet beneath the surface, tension crackled like static electricity. Prince William had settled into a fragile rhythm, coordinating staff, reviewing medical reports, and mentally rehearsing every potential scenario. When the call came that no one had expected, the palace doctor's voice was calm but urgent. "Your Highness, there's been a change. We've identified a complication we didn't anticipate." Those words landed like a shockwave. William's mind immediately raced through possibilities, fear and strategy colliding in equal measure. A complication. That single word distilled months of meticulous planning, careful monitoring, and hope into a moment of acute uncertainty. Every contingency, every backup plan suddenly had to be reevaluated. He moved quickly to the medical briefing room, aware that every second mattered. The senior physicians were already there, reviewing the new data, their faces betraying the gravity of the revelation even as they maintained professional composure. Charts, scans, and test results were spread across the table, illuminated by the soft glow of the overhead lights. The complication, they explained, was unexpected in both scope and impact. While earlier assessments had suggested a manageable progression, this new development altered the calculus significantly. Interventions that had been previously considered sufficient now required augmentation. Timing was critical. Decisions had to be made immediately. William listened carefully, absorbing the medical jargon and translating it into actionable understanding. He had long developed the ability to process complex information quickly, but this was different. This was personal. Each term carried weight not just for clinical outcomes, but for the woman he loved, the children he cherished, and the stability of the family he was sworn to protect. The doctors outlined a series of options, each with its own risks and probabilities. Some interventions offered a higher chance of stabilization but were more invasive. Others were less aggressive but carried the potential for slower recovery or additional complications. William weighed each recommendation, considering both the immediate impact and the longer-term consequences. In the midst of this technical assessment, he could not ignore the emotional landscape. Kate's resilience was legendary, but even the strongest individual has limits. William needed to anticipate not only medical responses but emotional responses, understanding how stress, fear, and uncertainty could impact her condition and her willpower. At the same time, he was acutely aware of the pressures outside the palace walls. Though the world was yet unaware of the urgency, the shadow of media scrutiny loomed. Any leaks, any hints, could trigger speculation that would complicate treatment and emotional stability. The balance between secrecy and necessary action had become a delicate tightrope, and William knew that a single misstep could have cascading consequences. The complication also forced the palace staff into overdrive. Schedules were shifted, aides were reassigned, and private quarters were adapted for emergency readiness. Every detail had to be precise, every action synchronized, and every communication carefully measured. William oversaw this operation with meticulous focus, aware that coordination at this level was as critical as any medical decision. In a rare private moment, he allowed himself to reflect on Kate's journey. She had navigated the pressures of public life with grace, managing appearances even as she endured challenges unseen by the world. Now, faced with this unexpected complication, she would need not just medical intervention but emotional support, reassurance, and the quiet strength that only a partner can provide. As he processed the new information, William also considered the children. George, Charlotte, and Louis remained unaware, blissfully shielded from the severity of the situation. Yet he knew that the unfolding events could not remain hidden forever. Preparing for potential disclosures, calibrating emotional support, and maintaining family stability became as urgent as managing the medical crisis itself. Then came another startling detail. The doctors revealed that this complication could accelerate progression if not addressed immediately. The window for intervention was narrower than initially estimated, leaving no room for delay. Every moment counted. William felt a surge of adrenaline tempered by the cold clarity of responsibility. Hesitation could be catastrophic. He coordinated with the medical team, confirming resources, verifying schedules, and ensuring that all necessary personnel were ready for immediate action. The palace staff executed his instructions flawlessly, their quiet professionalism a testament to years of experience and loyalty. Yet even in this orchestrated efficiency, there remained an undercurrent of tension, the knowledge that outcomes were never guaranteed. Amid the operational flurry, William returned briefly to reflection. He considered Kate's courage, the resilience she had demonstrated through months of private struggle, and the determination that had defined her public life. He drew